seafaring people. And because of that, from that and over the years, and if Leslie Campbell is listening to say, you know, over the years, I've collected lots of photographs and writings and newspaper cuttings, and I've been to the Newry Museum and the Public Records Office, put a lot of bits and pieces together, folks, over the years, higgledy-piggledy, and then I decided 2 years ago, I need to get rid of some stuff or put some stuff together. And a lot of what you'll see tonight is all in the public domain. You'll have seen a lot of this in the Sailing Ships of Morn and the old Kilkeel Long book and so on. But what I tried to do is put them together in a chronological way, really from the start, and trace the history right through, all the developments right through to the present day. And I might add also that it's not just the harbour, but alongside the harbour, methods changed and improved, and people were involved as well. So it's a mixture of the infrastructure and the people and the fishing methods and so on. So I'll begin now anyhow, shortly. It's surprising at all that Kilkeel does have a harbour, because back in the early 19th century, Annalong had a harbour, and Derry Oak, which is just outside Kilkeel, was really the place that was expected to be a harbour. It was a more natural harbour than Kilkeel, and it took a lot of effort to get a harbour in Kilkeel. As a matter of fact, the way back is 200 years ago in 1821, a Board of Fisheries report by an engineer called Alexander Nemo. He said that the stream at Kilkeel was obstructed by shingle, and it really was inaccessible. And any attempt, he said, to create any sort of a harbour would be unsuccessful. So what they did was they just made a few lines of piers, and in 1834 we had a few stones laid out, which gave you shelter from the southwest gales. And if you ever down at Kilkeel at the Windy Gap, and there's a Windy Gap up in the Mourns, but there's a Windy Gap also coming down from the Harbour Road. And beside it, you'll see really about 50 feet of the old original stones of one of the first piers. And so they didn't have a harbour at all. And in the 1840s and 50s, the fish was abundant in the Bay of Kilkeel, herring. And there were boats coming from all over, even as far as Cornwall, to fish these herring. And the poor people in Kilkeel had no way of accessing this, the small boats, and the inhabitants weren't too happy. So a large meeting was called in 1864. Men like Sam Burns, William McKee, well-known name around Kilkeel, Alec Robinson, probably of Annalong, and they got together and they offered to pay to build a harbour. And if we go to slide 1 now, you'll see really what was the probably the earliest photograph of Kilkeel. They ended up with this dock, or we call it now the basin. And this was around 1876, 77. And we can date that photograph because in the background, you see a wooden shed with a chimney. And some old schooners sitting up, and yes, up there. And over to the left, you see a round tank. That was for heating planks. Now, that was the boatyard of a man called William Painter. He came the whole way from Cornwall. He sailed from Cornwall and to set up this boatyard. And that's the first boatyard ever in Kilkeel. And he set that up, and he built lots of boats, small boats and big boats and all sorts of things from there. And he paid the Camurray estate £10, 10 shillings as a lease for, I think, 50 years. And he started there, and that is, you can see all the small boats and the schooners there. So that is really, and also in that photograph on the left-hand side, it is clear that you have all the granite. You see the granite curbs there? All these. So even then, Kilkeel was starting to export granite to places in England, Liverpool, Manchester, and places like that. And so William Painter, he was the first boat builder, and he stayed there for quite a number of years. And you look at number 2, the next slide. The second slide, that's, if you like, drawing back from that first photograph. And this is a great photograph. And amazing enough, you see that river. And that was a river, probably a culmination of the Kilkeel River and the Aughrim River. The Aughrim River runs through the centre of Kilkeel, and the Kilkeel River runs down through at Riverside, and they both come together and join to make this river. And in the background, you see all the little craft that are built, and a schooner in the dock, this dock. And also in the top right-hand corner, you see a wooden store. That was there, and lots of granite lying all over the place. That wooden store was for salt and herring. They kept it in there. But it's amazing, that photograph, that river runs. And to imagine what the harbour's like nowadays, you'll see later on what it's like. But that was, and in the background, I think you'll see, it's very difficult to see, but they ran water from the river. And they ran water, and that drove a big wheel, big water wheel to make the steam the planks, to bend the planks. And that water came from what they call a battery, which is like a pool at the river. So it's a wonderful photograph, and that's what it was like. And that was the first dock in the 1870s. There we are now number 3. That first dock you saw, it became very busy, and the harbour master wasn't very happy. He said, "I need a bigger place and a better place." And this is a great photograph. Now, that's interesting, this photograph. You see the activity around this dock now. And this is an update on that basin. In 1887, the government put £7,400, believe it or not, to improve that basin. And they raised the walls 18 inches. And they built a slip. You see a little slipway down at the bottom left-hand corner with the horse and cart. That was a slipway there. And there's another little slipway. You can't see it. It's right at the top of the old dock. A slipway was way up there. And you also see now a store in the foreground. That's a potato store. And all around that, you see the walls are much better now. The wooden shed is still there. See, and beside that wooden store, yes, you see all the wood. That's pit props. Those went to the mines in England. They exported those for the mines. And all the square sets, the small square sets in the foreground along the roadside, those are for the cobble streets and the horse and cart. And so the walls are much cleaner and much better, you'll see in that photograph. And that dock was now able to cater for 100 loggers. And every season there could have been nearly 300 boats coming up, all the fish. And at that time, the herring was the biggest fishing in Kilkeel. And at one stage in the early 1900s, a third of all the herring landed in Ireland was landed in Kilkeel, believe it or not. Now, also you'll notice in that dock, this is very important, I call it a knuckle. The entrance has been narrowed. You see, it's very hard for me to, yes, that bit behind the shed, there, to the left a bit, yes. Now, and that bit has been built on. See that where the cursor is now? That closed off the entrance, because before that, when it was wide, the tide and the sea came in. You must remember there wasn't much in the way of pier in those days, and the sea used to run in there. So they put that, what I call a knuckle, on, and that stayed on for many, many years. And that meant that there was more shelter in the basin. But in that, you'll see all the activities, but very few buildings. Only that foreground and the shed in the background. That's all the buildings there were. So Kilkeel, very important trading those days. You go on to the next slide, Aidan, please. Now, there's a difference. Now you're into the early 1900s. And I love this photograph. You see, what to say about this photograph? Well, in the foreground, you see a nice stone store. And the Lord Kilmurray built that for his boat. And the boat was called the Lady Nora. And it went down, of course, up with a little slip into the harbour. And In the background, the wooden shed is still there, but there's two new buildings to the left-hand side. And that was all to do with the barrels, the herring and coopering went on, making barrels and salting herring. That was, Callahan's had one of those stores, and McKee's had one of those stores. And you'll see that the dock is full of masts and boats in there. And also in this photograph, you see all the skiffs, those small craft, yes. They're all pulled up on the bank, and you wouldn't see that nowadays. But all those skiffs, if you notice the design, they're what's called clinker built. Now, for those who don't know anything about boats, clinker built skiffs are built with overlapping planks. Overlapping planks. Now, that's very important because I'll mention later on why that's very important, but nearly all the skiffs were built like that. And notice the river is still down the left-hand side, the river's still running down. And that was about between 1906 and 1913, that's what that looked like. But the basin was full of schooners, and we can't see in the distance, but no mini pier, no pier in the distance there. So if we move on to slide 5. Now, oh, yes, we have that now. That's a few changes in these days now. In that now you'll see the store in the foreground has got a life belt and it's painted white. And also you see in the background where there was a steep wooden shed, there's now a round roof building. And in behind that round roof building, there's a little cottage. And anyone around Kilkeel will know that little cottage. That was called Annie Scott's. And where those buildings are then, in around the 1900s, early 1900s, that is where now the Kilkeel Lifeboat Station is. Later on, you'll see the difference over the years. And the road is there, and you can see just a few schooners and barrels on the left-hand side. So that's a few changes in those days. Right, Ian, remember that's, now here we go. There you see, we're moving on now. We're still in the basin. We're still just before the 1920s. And here is this dock, and you can clearly see the knuckle now. You can clearly see the curbs on the right-hand side. Now, and on the left-hand side, the buildings, there are more buildings there now. That big, tall, round store, that was for storing grain. That was McKee's store. And it was said he had a mill in there. And also you see all the barrels all along the quayside. That was all big business in those days. That was herring and those barrels, salted in the barrels before the First World War. And a lot of that herring went to, believe it or not, to Russia and Germany and other places. They had fresh herring and cured herring. And a very, very busy port in those days. You see, look at that basin full of boats. Now, Aidan, if you just had, yes, just that boat at the very end there in the basin is called the Mill Bay. Now, the story about the Mill Bay is very interesting. The mill, it's not now named after Mill Bay that we have here. That was Mill Bay in Plymouth. And the Mill Bay came here and was bought by a man called Doyle. And that was Jerry Doyle's uncle. He bought that. And he bought it off another man called, he was Thomas Doyle. And he bought it off a man called John Rooney. Now, John Rooney, we'll know later on, John Rooney, there's a Rooney Road in Kilkeel. So that was the same John Rooney. We'll talk about him later on. And that Mill Bay traded in Kilkeel right across from 1906 to 1929. And for example, it was built in Plymouth. It was bought by John Rooney and then sold to Thomas Doyle. And it traded out of Kilkeel. Coal went to Maryport, potatoes to Newport, coal from Warringstown and Garson, and at times then curbs to Liverpool. And it was involved in all of that. And then eventually it was sold to Chestnuts. Now that's not Chestnuts that people will know in Kilkeel, Chestnuts in Donegal. And a girl called Lulu Chestnut if you ever find it, has written a book all about the history of the Mill Bay and interesting stories with that. Now, on the left-hand side, you only see part of a boat lying alongside the quayside. Yes, that was called the Henrietta. And it was bought by a Kurt Helm in 1936. And believe it or not, that boat then went to Gordonstown in Scotland, where the Royals go to. And it was a training ship for the pupils up in the Murray Firth. And that's interesting. That was sailed, and it was sailed up to Murray's Firth by a guy called, one of the Newells, by an Alec Newell. We know an Alec Newell in Kilkeel, but this was his predecessor. And that was sailed up there. And I went to Gordonstown School for training sailors up there. So that's a lovely, clear photograph. It's a beautiful photograph. And the coastal trade, the herring, the fishing, all that happened. But there are many complaints. You can see that harbour is so full. There's so many complaints that and about, not only about how busy it was, but they couldn't get in and out, about the shallowness, talking about the shallowness of the pier and no water and so on. So if you go to the next slide, please, Aidan. Yes. And here you'll see, now, these are the boats. They're lying off the harbour. And you see they're small crafts taking the people out, because at times they couldn't get in and out of the harbour because of what they call the shallowness. There was no water. Interesting now, anyone who lives in Kilkeel is still the same, actually, 100 years later. But those boats are all lying out. Those are called nickies or nobbies. They're a small, about 40-foot sailing fishing boat, mostly sail, no engines. And in the foreground, of course, a great view as well of still all the pit props, all the wood, all the square sets and so on. But those nickies, I'll tell you a story, and that's about 1918, this photograph. There's no Meanies Pier. In Kilkeel nowadays, there are two piers. There's that main pier, you see the South Pier, and then there's a Meanies Pier on the left, but we haven't got it yet. But those, a story about those fishing boats lying in the bay, a personal story. My great-grandfather, Charlie Cassidy, fished in one of those. He actually owned a boat called the Cypress. And in 1918, in May 1918, a German submarine appeared and sank 5 of the fishing boats. They're fishing about 12 miles off the shore. And including my great-grandfather's boat, the Cypress. And he came home, and story goes, he came home really in his bare feet, and there was no compensation in those days, no insurance, and it affected him greatly. And I think his wife probably had to. Fortunately, his family was all grown up, but it was a difficult time. And story also goes, there was a man called Tommy Donnan who fished on a boat. The same boat was also sunk, called the Never Can Tell. And many years later, Tommy was interviewed for the newspapers about 1952. And the newspaper reporter said to Tommy, I believe you were in the crew of the Never Can Tell when it was sunk by a German submarine. And Tommy, being a smart man, said, no, I wasn't. And the reporter said, I thought you were the last surviving member of the crew of the Never Can Tell. Oh, yes, I am, said Tommy. But it wasn't on the Never Can Tell when it was sunk. I was on it 15 minutes before it was sunk. So the reporter sort of was taken aback a bit about that. But that's those nickies. That's the sort of boats were sailing in those days. A great photograph. And so that was about 1918. And so there was need then for an obvious need, because of all the trade and because of the fishing and all the coastal trade, and it brought a lot of prosperity and growth to Kilkeel, and there was obviously a need for expansion. And in 1913, even before this, there was a scheme for an improvement of Kilkeel Harbour, and then plans were submitted, and the wishes of the fishermen were for an inner harbour. And you can see here now what happened. The fishermen, this is very interesting, folks, because the fishermen were told, you better to build a harbour out into the sea where there's water. You can have deep water. And the fishermen said, no, they wanted an inner harbour because they said there was space around the harbour then for buildings and so on and so forth. And there was a whole row submitted, and the county surveyor ordered to prepare a scheme for an outer harbour, and the fishermen, they stood their ground, said, no, we want to go in. And eventually then they did go in. And they went in then because the fishermen reckoned it was safer to go in. And then also it turned out actually to be cheaper as well. So this is a view, a very, very early view looking down at the harbour that was built. And they broke through then in about 1918. They broke through into this, what's called now the inner dock. And here we see, I'm not sure where I've got 7.
Am I on the wrong slide, Roy?
Hey?
Am I on the wrong slide?
Sure 7, no, I don't know where, just wondering where I am, my numbers.
I think this was your 7 here.
What is 7? Yes, okay, well, I'll go ahead, yes, you go ahead, the next one, yes, that's it. Now, this, you're right, we're right. That is the City Harbour, and also you see now that road, and that is the Rooney Road we have nowadays. And that guy I mentioned earlier, Klondike Rooney, he made his money in a Klondike. He went over and with his money and he came back, and he was involved in, he said we'd need a road to join this part of the town to the other part of the town. They had a shore road and they had a manse road and didn't have a road, and they named that road after him. And he also bought the Royal Hotel at the time. He bought it, and it was called Rooney's Hotel. So now you see a river running down this side. The river's been pushed away over to the north, if you like. And the river used to be way down at the back of that photograph. The river's down there before. And so you see, it's just a distant photograph of that. And that improves the capacity. If you go on to the next slide, number 9, Aidan, please. And there you see, that's looking back up now the Rooney Road. And this again is it must be about the early 1920s. And a few of the big boats lying at the top. And again, the stone sets, the sets at the side of the road, horse and cart, and improved transport. I think there's a lorry there as well. And you see further back, you see a bridge. That bridge is still there today. That's over the river coming out of the town, which is the Auckland River. And so that's the harbour as it was in those days. And then number 10, the next slide. And that's how you got in. You see now clearly. They broke through and what's called the bridge. And in the middle of the photograph, you see that bridge. Now, I don't remember that bridge. I think it must have disappeared about the 1940s. That was a sort of sliding bridge. You rolled it across and it slid across one side to the other. That area, of course, is still called the bridge, but it's much wider now. They had to widen it more recent years to let bigger boats. And in the background, you see the stores you saw earlier. And at the very left, and the river running round the back, and you notice no boats now in the old dock. The old dock is over the right-hand side, and no boats in there now, but a few more stores and sheds down the foreground, down in there. And over the top left, the very left in there, that was Albert Annett. That became a marine engineer's store. And that was there, you'll see it in some later photographs. That was there years and years and years. And that's about 1920. But it's only about this time then that before this, there was all sailing boats. And the fishing boats were all sail. But then engine power became more prevalent than in the 1920s. And the first motor fishing boat was called the Ellen Constance. And that was bought by Lord Murray. And he was very important, actually. It was good to the fishermen. And a lot of herring fishing and so on and so forth. And before that was all drifting. But now motors became more important. And if you see the next photograph, 11, here you see a lot of these lying along the pier. And these are boats that are ready for herring drifting. And on those boats, you can see the right at the front, yes, in there, these big round things down the side of the boat, down there on the right-hand side there. Yes, those are round pallets. Those were made of leather, believe it or not, and they put air into them, and that's floated the nets, and they were all used for drifting, and the nets are on the foreground. And drifting was one of the, in those days, the only way you caught fish really was by drifting. Or in the smaller skiffs, you had what's called trammel nets. You put the nets out from the boat and you place them in a line, and you stake the nets and the fish swam into them. But drifting, you had to drift with the fish. A very, very difficult thing to do, and you need a great expertise to catch the fish. But and you see a lovely photograph and all the stone bollers. This is all changed nowadays. That's not there any longer. And you see, and the stone steps, you see the stone steps in the foreground. Anybody of my age will remember those, because we would jump and go down and swim in the harbour, swim from that pier over to the other pier, over to what's called now Meany's Pier. So that's what it was like in the 1920s. And that's the next slide. We look inside, and here we move inside to the harbour, and that's again around about the 1920s and 30s. And you see the boats, and see now the difficulty with Kilkeel Harbour always was, and especially when they went in, was it dried out. You see there the tide is half in, but when the tide went out, everything was in the mud, and the boats all sat in the mud, and that's the way it was for years and years and years. And you see some Nickies sitting there, moored there, and that Maggie, that's a way of propping the boat up rather it fell, so it wouldn't fall on the sides. They had these props at the side, and it kept it from falling over. And that's what it's like in the 20s and 30s. In the very background, you can see where the bridge is, a big sailing ship. The way you can see the bridge in the very, very back in there, you just see the bridge across. And that's the same time. That's around 1920s. Right. Oh, where are we now? Yes. Now, here we go. This was after about 1926. You see, that's different to the first photograph which was shown on the two piers. On the one pier was shown earlier. Now you've got two piers here. You've got, yes, that's it. That was Meany's Pier. That's still Meany's Pier. It was called Meany's after the guy who built that. He was called Meany, so they called it Meany's Pier. And again, you'll notice the other pier, the south pier, where the men are standing. People are standing, watching the boats coming and going. There's no light at the end of that pier. And nowadays, there's lights and all sorts of things, but there's no light there. And again, you see the small skiffs. Now, I'm going to tell you about the small skiffs in the foreground. If you remember earlier, I talked about Tinkerbuilt. Now, when William Painter came and built his boatyard up in 1875, most of his skiffs were Tinkerbuilt, overlapping. My grandfather had a skiff built around this time, 1921, and it was what's called Carvel built. Now, Carvel is that's sort of planks edge to edge, and you plugged in between the planks, pardon me, with putty, and you had a smooth surface then, whereas the other was Tinkerbuilt. And because it was so important, his skiff was called the Children's Hope, and he had 5 sons, and they all were fished with him in the Children's Hope. And the Children's Hope then was left to rot on the top of the old boatyard in the 1970s. And myself and a friend took the Children's Hope and put it back in the water and put new frames so on. But anyhow, because of its historical importance, because it's one of the first Carville-built skiffs by Mackintosh, it now is it was taken away to the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum down in Kilkeel. But unfortunately, I don't think it's on display. Sorry. It's down in Kilkeel, and it's moved down there and it's sitting down there because of its importance. And another interesting fact about that, my grandfather, unfortunately, had appendicitis when he was a young man, and he had to go to Dungannon Hospital. And the Children's Hope was paid for it was a government grant, and my grandfather had to pay installments. And because he was in hospital, he wasn't able to pay installments. And the neighbours all joined together and paid the installments for him. Because there was an investigation, they were going to take the boat off him. But his neighbours said, no, we'll pay. Just shows the neighbourliness of people in those days, the fishing fraternity. Right, well, number 14 now, slide. And here we have a photograph now later on. We're in now to about the 1930s. That's a great view of there's the river now, you see. And that store in the middle of the photograph, that's the marine workshop annex. And in the harbour, you see more skinners and all the skiffs at the top. And the bank down the side is where, in the winter time when the skiffs weren't working, you see a photograph later on. Yes, they're all drawn up onto that bank. And this is quite a modern photograph. And that bridge went across, and you could have walked down there. My father used to take us on Sunday mornings and walk down that road, over that bridge, and away around and up, way along the shore, and up either Moor Road or Leastone Road. Anyone from Kilkeel will know what I'm talking about there. And but that's a lovely photograph, and that's Annette's store in the foreground. And then if we go to the next slide, yes, now we're looking across the other side, and that's just telling you about, you see all the skiffs drawn up on the shore, and that all happened during the winter time. There's a lot of trade in Kilkeel, and you see there in the foreground there's a steamboat. Now, right up until probably 1950s, steamboats used to come into Kilkeel, and there were boats that came in and took potatoes out, export potatoes, and coal came in. And again, my grandfather was, he used to drive the big steam winch and the coal boats. And if you remember, some people remember that they had these big buckets, and the men worked down and shoveled the coal into the buckets, and the buckets discharged the coal onto the lorries. And then the lorries went up, telling you about the Windy Gap earlier, there's a slope up that road, and the lorries went up there, and very often the coal fell off, the overload fell off on the roadside, and people used to come along and get free coal, lift the coal along the roadside. So that's a photograph there, and that's about in the 1930s, I would say. And you see a steam and the boats in there. It's a lovely, nice photograph of what the inner dock was like. Right, Aidan, we're on next. What number are we on next? Right, we move forward now. Changes and what happened right up to this time. This photograph is since 1966. Right from the 1940s on, the whole industry changed. The cargo ships and all that to finish, all the granite and the pit props and even the herring barrels, the herring fishing. It declined a lot after the First World War, and then right through until about the 30s and 40s, when we had motor power took over from sailing power, and drifting and drifting then nearly became a thing of the past. And in about 1936, a Scotch boat came up into the fish herring off Kilkeel, and the fishermen noticed the way they were fishing, and they were what's called seine netting. Now, seine netting was a very effective way of catching fish. Seine netting was you encircle the fish, a big circle. You put your net around a big circle, and you encircle the fish, and you close the net in and pull it in, and that's the way. You need, of course, motor and winches to do that, and that's the way fishing was for a good number of years. And really drifting for herring then became a thing of the past, and seine netting. So that was, and because it was so successful, all the cargo and all the fishing, a lot of local businessmen invested in the fishing industry, and even families became involved in the fishing industry. As a matter of fact, between 1922 and 1940, there were only 8 boats that were registered as fishing boats. And after 1940, it really was a boom time for modern fishing. And this photograph really, you see now, is quite modern. As I say, it's in the 60s. You can still see the bank where the skiffs are drawn up on the right-hand side. And the river is running down the way over to the right. You can't see it. It's running down the other side. The road goes down there. Yes, Aidan, good man. And the river runs down there as well. And you see some factories at the top end of the basin. And right in, and if you cursor to the right, you see a little store at the top. Yes, just there. That was Lord Kilmurray. He built that in 1936 for another one of his boats. That was, and I remember the remains of that when I was a young boy there. That was still there because I was still quite young, 1966. So fishing really became the biggest thing in Kilkeel. All the cargo stuff changed because Warren Point and Uri became more important for that. And all the cargo and the granite, all that, as you know, just ceased at this time. Now, one important thing happened in about 1950. Somebody discovered these things you could catch called creepy crawlies. And creepy crawlies were in actual fact prawns. And there was one of my committee I was telling you about earlier, that helped me set up the Maritime Museum, was Bill Quinn. Now, Bill Quinn worked in Painter's boatyard. Bill Quinn, Painter at the boatyard, then Mackintosh came along after him, and Bill Quinn came along as his apprentice. And Bill Quinn built boats for years himself. And Bill was sent down to Clockerhead and down south to make a set of what's called trawl doors. Now, hard to explain trawl doors for those not used to fishing, but trawl doors were 2 rectangular shaped doors attached to the front of the net and towed behind the boat to try and keep the net open so as you could catch things. And these prawns, and Bill Quinn built the first doors for a man called Davy Wilson. And Davy Wilson fished a boat called the Mary Joseph. And the Mary Joseph was built in Peyton's boatyard. And it also now is down at the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, the Mary Joseph. So Bill made these set of doors for Davy Wilson. And he caught these things called creepy crawlies and in the 50s. And nobody was interested in them. But of course, other people caught on, and then other boats started to make trawls and trawl doors. And of course now, your creepy crawlies, your prawns, your scampi, is the biggest product now in Kilkeel. I'll talk more about that shortly, but it's what nearly all the boats now in Kilkeel fish. And the herring fishing, which we talked about earlier, that nearly, unfortunately, although it was the biggest, how Kilkeel started, it was nearly one of the biggest thing in the 20s and 30s. But now the herring fishing has nearly ceased off our coast. Now the herring are still there in large shoals, but the skiffs, because of, well, not say Brexit, but quotas came in and they weren't allowed to fish the herring, and they were only allowed to fish so many. And now all those little skiffs, that's all a thing of the past now. But all these boats you see in this photograph, they'd all been owned by families. Now, you can really go through the alphabet. Fishing families. You've got the Annetts, the Balances, the Campbells, the Currans, Cousins, Chambers, Doyles, Forsyths, Hannahs, McGuinness, McKees. You could go on and on and on. And that's the way, in those days, probably we call it families at sea. Families, a boat. My father had a boat. My grandfather had 5 sons, and they were all fishermen and merchantmen and so on and so forth. And so a lot of good men made a good living out of the fishing in those days. But as you see there, that harbour again is now full up, too full. It soon became full of boats. So we've got another slide. Next one. Yes. So then in the 50s and 60s, the various things happened, but we needed to enlarge the harbour again from that inner dock. And here we go again. The fishermen said, we want to go out. We want to build a new harbour out into the sea. Remember, I told you before, they originally wanted to come in. So the fishermen now wanted to go out, but all the powers that be said, no, you're going in. So they come in, and you're going into, you're digging up fields, and you're trying to bring the sea away up here. So there was a lot of discussion and so on and so forth, and with various authorities. And my father and others were involved in meetings with in those days, with Down District Council, with the Ministry of Commerce, the Ministry of Agriculture, and so on and so forth. A lot of consultation. And in those days, there was a group called the Ulster Sea Fishermen's Association. My father was involved in that, and other people like Sam McKnight, Alec Newell, Willie John Campbell, Ernie McKee, Stanley McKee, Victor Chambers, man along. They went down and met various people in Stormont and so on. This was about 1965, 66. And they had a lobby for many, many years to get the harbour extended. And work then began to extend the harbour in 1971, 72. And in this photograph, and you see a big store in the background, you see the red roof, that was a fish market. You can't see in this photograph, you see in other ones, there was slipway was involved, and all the road. Now you see the road down here, the left-hand side. The river has gone. That's now a road. All the skiffs used to be drawn up on the side. That's all gone. That's all concrete slabs, and the whole thing has changed now again. And the river, they put the river into the harbour. You'll see another photograph, and they diverted the river into the harbour. And the fishermen told the surveyors not to do that, because you'll bring down a lot of silt, you'll block up the harbour, and it did block up, and it still blocks up the pier of where the original Kilkeel River used to go. And they said it was inaccessible. Well, sometimes still it's inaccessible, at certain times the tide. So that's a fairly modern photograph there. That's in the 70s. And the official opening of that new harbour was 1973. And it was good because it gave a lot of work. There were 55 more men working, and the local contractor, Sir Lee Stevenson, he did well. He provided the sand and cement and so on. And they were told that to be 6 foot of water at low tides in this new harbour. And it's not too bad, but still needed more improvements. We've got another site number. Next one we'll go now. So here we see the harbour is doubling in size. Believe it or not, that's now with the new extension, and the whole thing is doubled up. And now you see that in that they had to make more changes, and they had to go. It's hard to see, but you see in the right-hand side, they've dug it out. They had to put down in the 80s, 1989. They started to build on that side. That's called the north side, where that white building is. All those factories down there, and that was the north side. So they had to put another quay up there to provide more space. And when they did that, they had space for about 150 vessels. And you go to 19, you go on the next slide, moving on quite quickly now to modern times. And here is an aerial photograph. And now you see more or less nearly the harbour as it is now at the moment. And there's the old basin there, where it's then on right up into the new harbour. The red building, the red roof building is now extended. That's all the fish market. And up the north side of the quay, and no sign of the river now at all, because the river comes in. I see another photograph way up at the top. So this is fairly much up to date, this particular photograph. And the next photograph, I think, will show us. There you are now. That's that's what was the old dock, one of the very first photographs. That's number two. And you see the knuckle I talked about, completely gone now. A lovely slipway now. That slipway can provide for boats of quite big sizes. All the left-hand side is all built up. The right-hand side is all built up. The Coast Guard, the lifeboat station is there. Aidan, could you show us slide 3 again, please? Go back another one. Or back another one, yeah. Go back, yeah, yes. Yeah. Oh no, there. Oh, right, go to number 3 again. Sorry, yes, number 3. And you see that's what it was used to be like. And go to that last one now, and you see, just to compare. Go on up number, yes, and that's so now you see what has happened in about 150 years, and that's where we are now, and Kilkeel fishermen have always been very proactive and looking for changes and looking to improve. And you see the boats there now. Remember I told you about William Painter in the boatyard in 1875. He was followed by McIntosh, Bill Quinn, Liam McCartan, and Ian Newell has got works beside this basin. He has made boats. And now we have a new boat builder in Kilkeel. You can't see it. There's a shed away at the back of that photograph called Jerry Smith. Jerry Smith Boats. Now, Jerry Smith builds boats, but he builds fiberglass boats, or like plastic boats. In the original day, my father's day, there were wooden boats and then steel boats. And the fishing industry and the families are still involved in the fishing industry. For example, I mentioned herring off the shore. Now, the biggest fishing boat probably in Britain is owned by a Kilkeel fisherman called Arnold McCullough. And he fishes mackerel and herring still. He fishes in thousands of tons, whereas small skiffs fish in a few boxes. And he is a family of McCulloughs, and his grandfather, Arnie McCullough, started off in a skiff, and his father's a great fisherman, and his uncles. And then you've got also the Orr family. So you still get the Orr family of several fishing boats. They have big boats too. And these big boats that they have, folks, they're so big they cannot fit into Kilkeel. And they're worth millions and millions of pounds. They're very successful fishermen. For size, they're still a family that fish. The Keys are still a family very successful. So families at sea and the family of fishermen still go on and on and on. And around, just to finish off, around Kilkeel, I haven't got a slide, but all around the harbour now, yes, all around the harbour, oh, here we have it, all around the harbour you see, there are buildings and works going around. There's fish factories. There are about 20 or 30 different factories all around the harbour in Kilkeel now. And you've got the Nautilus Centre as well at the top. You've got a pontoon system. You see up at the top there as well. That's for small fishing boats. Haven't got time to go into all of that, but that was developed in about 2015 to make it easier to go on to small boats. It wasn't safe going down ladders. You've got the lifeboat house. You've got buildings all around, and you've got Jerry Smith. And nowadays, fishermen also do what's called guard work. Some of the fishing boats take a month to guard work that's going on, laying pipes in the Irish Sea and other North Sea for oil and electricity and things like that. And so the Kilkeel fishermen have always moved forward, and you see from the very start, from down below right up to the top, in fishing methods and fishing techniques. And they plan now to go to this last slide I have. All of that coloured stuff you see is way, way outside the present harbour. There are plans now, or an idea anyhow, of a big new outer harbour. If you remember the very first harbour that the fishermen I told you about, they didn't want to go out, they wanted to come in, but now they want to go out, they want to go out again. So this is about a £30 million project. They were going ahead full steam with it before Brexit. I'm not quite sure when this will happen, but as you've seen in my story, folks, that Kilkeel families and fishermen have progressed. They're great compared with other harbours. They're always looking ahead in methods and in infrastructure. This is the next big plan. And I don't know whether I see it in my day, but I really hope that they will get this, because it's very important for the community. And one final thing I'd say, just the fishing boats nowadays, you'll see lots of people about Kilkeel from other countries. And unfortunately, although they have families at sea, it is very difficult to get crews nowadays. It's hard work still. And a lot of crews now, great people from Philippines and Russia and Belarus and Africa. We have great fishermen there. And they live on the boats. And the Fishermen's Mission, also in Kilkeel, does a great job looking after these men. And the Nautilus Centre, in front of the Nautilus Centre also, to finish, fishing has always been, and seafaring has always been, a dangerous occupation. And there's a lovely memorial in front of the Nautilus Centre in Kilkeel. If you're ever down, it's a lovely wave shape. It's a granite memorial, a granite stone. And to finish you on a little story you might be interested in, this granite stone came from the Mourne quarries, and it was made by McConnell Brothers. And McConnell Brothers also, their stone made the Diane Memorial in Hyde Park. And if you know, I'm sure you know, he hasn't got great press recently, but Prince Harry, believe it or not, one of his titles was Baron of Kilkeel. So Baron of Kilkeel, his mother, is the granite that they built from our memorial, also built the tribute to his mother in Hyde Park, the memorial to her. So there's connections there also. And when I get visitors coming along, I tell them this connection. But anyhow, maybe I better not mention much about it now, because Harry's not getting a great press. Anyhow, folks, that's all I've talked about. I may say that those 20 slides are only a sample. I have about 100 slides and a lot of writing. And I'm hoping someday to put together, if we get funding, to put together a book to do the whole story. It's quite complicated, a lot more to it. But anyhow, that's me finished here. And thank you very much.
That was brilliant, Roy. Thanks very much. Well done. Fascinating story, and great the way you've kind of tied all those pictures together. So if anybody wants to ask questions, feel free to unmute yourself at this point or drop them into the chat and we can fire them over to Roy. Roy, there's a question there from Andy Hall. Does Richard Needham, ex-NIO minister, have any interest in the harbour, as I assume it was his ancestors who originally rented the land to the boat builder from Cornwall?
Yes, well, interesting question, Andy. Well, when Brexit was beginning to happen, and the fishermen in Kilkeel were actually very keen, because of the quotas and so on, and because of the restrictions Europe was putting onto them. The fishermen, I think, probably were very keen to leave the European market and have the whole Irish Sea to themselves. Didn't quite happen the way, but there was a meeting in the local hotel, and Richard Needham was there. I happened to be there. And Richard Needham, interesting enough, warned the fishermen. He said, now, you've got to remember that the fishing industry is a very small, about 0.5% of the GDP of Britain's economy. And believe you me, I wouldn't depend too much on the British government. And but they still were keen to move, so they have left. And now they've left and they've discovered that things haven't quite worked out the way they wanted. I don't think they're going to get free access to their fishing grounds. They reckon Scotland's going to get a bit more and we're getting, and so on. So Richard Needham, yes, a very, very shrewd politician, and he has still interest in the, and he did come and speak to him. So he certainly is interested, yes.
There's a question there then from David. Will the new harbour be based on prawns or something else? Do you know?
Well, prawns is actually only one of the main products of Kilkeel. There's still land, whitefish, cod. Well, codfish now is all quoted. Very little codfish. Quite a few haddock. Quite a lot of work on crabs and lobster and so on. No, the idea in this big outer harbour would that it could accommodate the bigger boats. Now, the ones I mentioned, Arnold McCullough's boat, it's something like 78 meters. It's like a liner, pardon me. No way, it can only fit into Belfast or Derry or a place like that. And the other oars of big boats go into Bangor. They can't fit into Kilkeel. But if they were able to come to Kilkeel, they could increase bring herring and mackerel into the factories and bring a lot more into the local economy. So one of the main reasons was to accommodate these bigger boats that actually belong to Kilkeel but can't access the harbour in Kilkeel. So that is one of the main reasons. Plus the fact that Kilkeel at the minute, to enter Kilkeel between those two piers in very bad weather, it's very, very difficult. It's only a skill of the fishermen that allows them to come in around. Imagine big waves flying over that pier, and I've seen boats just having difficulty. So a big outer pier, you have a sheltered area, and inside that you may see the plan, maybe have a marina or something. So it'll give access to lots of other facilities as well.
Very good. Is the market still held regularly, or is there fish now sold online? That's from Tom.
It's a good question, Tom. Yes, the market is not the way it used to be. Yeah, you couldn't. First of all, the market's not what it used to be. They don't land boxes and boxes on the market. They seem to do it now. Contact the buyer, and it seems to be it comes onto the market, and the price is agreed and straight onto the back of a lorry. So the market is not like it used to be. The box all laid out, and even when they did extend the market, under hygiene regulations and so on and so forth, Joe public like you and me, you're not allowed really to go into the market now when this fresh fish has been sold. So, but the market, I think there's still a small market sometimes, but it's not the way, he's probably talking something the way it used to be. I used to go in there and look at it all, but it usually lands in and away quite quickly. And it's not the auctioneering and so on and so forth that there used to be. That's all changed.
Okay, somebody's just asking for the website there. I've posted it on the chat. So hopefully you have that. And we'll put this recording up afterwards, and all the other recordings are on there too for anybody that's interested.
Roy, if I may, something saying, I would know a lot of those names through the local football, Newcastle League, and McKay's, Allison, McCullough's, Blenny's, etc. I personally know Angus McCullough, who goes out in Ireland. McCullough's later come forward. He said 3 months on, 3 months off. But I noticed there's a life belt fixed to the dock there. I'm just wondering how many accidents it took to get a life belt in those days.
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Tom. What was that?
I noticed in one of your early slides, it was a life belt fixed to the wall. It was quite prominent looking. I'm sure there were plenty of accidents before that was provided.
Yes, well, I don't remember many accidents, but I do remember, strange enough, there have been people, and that Seafarers Memorial I was telling you about. I should have said also that I was involved in the committee that put that together. That memorial was erected in 2002 when tragically a fishing boat sunk off Kilkeel. The Green family. It was a grandfather, father, and grandson. And that, interesting enough, the memorial was just erected that same year as that family was lost. and we produced a book which is in the Fisherman's Mission now of all those are lost from the 1800s to present day. And I don't remember a life belt being used too often, but other people, Tom, in the harbour have slipped and fallen between fishing boats and lost their lives that way. And I don't suppose they would have time to go for a life belt or found that there, the time that they maybe hit their head or something. I don't ever remember life belt or being used at all. So I'm sure that if it needed, it was there. Nowadays, there are a few scattered about the place, but I don't remember that one being used, no.
Thank you.
Okay. I've lost the chat window here, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself as well and ask them. There's another one there from David. Roy, he's saying, was there a local barrel making industry or were they brought in empty and then sent out with the salted herring?
It's before my time, yes, but my understanding is that there was a local, yes, cooperage, yes, there was. And some of those stores near, and the older photographs, they're the same. Yes, they had the barrels, they made the barrels and the rings around the planks. Yes, that was part of the industry as well. And then later on, who asked that question, sorry?
That was David McGinn.
David. And then interestingly, David, the herring fishing did continue for a few years after even those wooden barrels went out of existence. And then in the 70s, the herring were still salted and exported. And they're in plastic barrels then. You remember, you've probably seen those blue plastic barrel things with the lids on. And that's the move from the wooden barrels to those plastic barrels. And especially in Annalong, where it did a lot more fish curing than actually did in Kilkeel. Mrs. Cousins, Elizabeth Cousins down there, the skiffs all landing there. So they were put into blue plastic barrels. But yes, originally they were. Don't worry, I wish my grandson was in behind me as well. Right, that's, yeah.
Okay, we've Patricia's recommending that you do the book, Roy. I think I'll back her up on that. It'll be interesting to see the full story.
Somebody mentioned about Derry Oak. I see something come up there about Derry Oak.
Yeah, you mentioned Derry Oak Harbour. Did it have a man-made pier?
No, Derry Oak was just was a natural area, and many people felt that it should have been developed into a harbour because it's more natural shape and more sheltered than Kilkeel ever was. There is a sort of a bay in Derry Oak, and Derry Oak Point comes out, and there's a shelter there. And interesting enough, there were two boat builders, Duncan Scott and Andrew Morris, I think his name were. There were two boat builders building skiffs, small boats at Derry Oak before there were any boats built in Kilkeel, strangely enough. Kilkeel only moved ahead and started because of the influence of quite a few businessmen that locally put money together, and that's how Kilkeel started. But Derry Oak would have been a more natural harbour, if you like, but it never developed as a harbour.
Okay. Well, maybe time for one more if anybody has it. Or we'll wrap things up. Okay, I think we'll wrap things up there.
David,
everyone...
thanks very much for the help with those slides and things. I couldn't have done that without you. That's brilliant.
No problem. You're welcome. Very welcome. Thanks everyone for joining, and I do just want to take a minute just to thank everybody that contributed to the talk. So thanks to Norma Fisher-Hanna, David Hanna, Owen Halpin, Isaac Hanna, Marianne McGreevy, Lily Annett, and yourself, Roy, all the talkers speakers that did the 10 talks for us. With 10 talks and over 400 people joined. So I think it was a great response to them. So a lot of familiar faces throughout that we can see, but thanks everyone for joining. And thanks to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for funding the whole thing. And somebody that's kind of sitting in the background throughout it all, quietly asking questions, but never taking his mic off. Andy Hall was the one that brought us all together and organized this. So thanks to Andy. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself there, Andy, and say a few words.
Yeah, okay, I'll just do it briefly. No, it was something just that came up with the football club, just with different people talking about how we didn't really know much about our own area, considering, you know, we were all in lockdown and with nothing to do. So it was just something to do at the time. There's another one coming up which is even better, and Aidan will be really pleased that he'll not have a massive amount to do on it. But we'll be announcing another one shortly. We're doing a project about 1921. And before anybody jumps out the window, it's not a celebration of anything. It's just a factual thing. There'll be a series of 3 talks. And one of them is a very, very interesting talk, because in 1921, the Irish Football Association, the Southern clubs split with the Irish Football Association to set up the Football Association of Ireland. So it'll be a very, very interesting talk for anyone who's interested in football. But just the good thing about this is, you know, it was very much from our point of view, and I think Roy said he couldn't have done it without Aidan. Well, I couldn't have done any of this without Aidan, you know, because Aidan's the guy that set up all the IT. The good thing about this was we had no idea how it would go, and it's gone far better than we could ever have expected. At this minute in time, just to let you in with a chance, we've got 12 places, or probably 10 places, for people to take part in a genealogy project. It's 6 classes, and it'll show you how to research your family history. So if anyone wants to email me to say they'd be interested in that, we haven't set the dates yet, but it's likely to be just 6 2-hour sessions, and it'll teach you how to look up your family history. And the final one is it gives you the opportunity, if you wish, you can get your DNA done, and then that will tell you a lot more about your history. But that's another thing. But I have to say, many thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund, because really and truly, it's something that we couldn't have achieved without that. And somebody mentioned Roy's book there. We'll have a chat with Roy to see if we can hook Heritage Lottery to maybe fund a book on that, because having listened to that talk tonight, it was just absolutely fantastic. It really was.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely
thanks to
great.
everybody for supporting it. It was just a one-off occasion. It's very rare that a football club ever gets involved in heritage things. There was absolutely nothing in it for the football club, but the interest that it is generated for the football club shows that it was well worth doing. So thanks again for everybody who supported us.
Thanks,
Okay,
Andy.
thank you.
And
Thank you.
thanks, everyone. Okay, well, that's us. We're going to wrap it up there, and if there's any more talks, we'll certainly get in touch and let you all know. So keep an eye on social media, or chat to Andy if you know him. All the best, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
and good night.
Bye. Bye.
Same.
Thank you.